All right. Hello, everyone. We are Team Codesaurus, and welcome to our Sprint to Progress presentation. The project we're proposing, or we've proposed and have been working on, is Quest, a journey into the unknown, and the choice is up to you. The idea behind Quest is to develop an interactive novel kind of a project where creativity meets dynamic interactions. We'll get a little bit more into what we've been working on so far uh, in the further slides. So this is our agenda for today, and we will be starting with introducing our team.
Hello, I'm Ayla.
Hi, I'm Clive Lewis, and I'm the developer and tester.
Hi, I'm Dhruv Joshi. I'm the Scrum Master and the developer.
Hi, I'm Renmai. I'm the developer slash tester.
Hi, I'm Dylan. I'm the full stack developer.
Hello, I'm Farham. I'm team lead and also developer.
Hello again. I am Sharon, and I am the full stack developer. So we made a bunch of improvements from our last sprint. Uh, as stated, we reevaluated our story points to get a more realistic timeline and a more realistic team velocity for our sprint progress. We also split down larger user stories into smaller ones so we could better implement and develop them. We separated our user stories by user roles just for more clarity and to be more specific as to which user role we're catering what features to. We elaborated a little more on the tech stack that we have chosen for the project. And for our testing phase, we included an actual result column to see if a test case has failed, what was the actual result uh, that was displayed instead as compared to the expected test result. And for our sprint backlog, while reevaluating, we also only added the user stories as opposed to broken down user stories.
So this section is going to cover what problems we're solving with our development of Quest. So the reason we're developing this product is because we are trying to create an interactive novel that is allowing people to have unlimited flexibility when they're doing role-playing games. It also helps with lack of imaginations by helping to create inspirations while creating stories. It also is helps to create a story that is within your mind. So it is going to be very personalized and relatable to the user's understanding. And it's also going to be an effective way to work through creative blocks because of the way it's dynamically generating stories and it being very relatable to your understanding. So Quest tackles these challenges using an AI-driven narrator. So our solution is different than the existing solutions, which are the Zork that has been uh, an interactive novel since I'm assuming around 1980s, where you, as the user, can play a story but have limited decisions. And our solution is to kind of inspired from that, have where we can progress through the story, but instead of having limited solutions, we have unlimited choices where the user can progress through the story with. And also, we have a more dynamic story generation, meaning that the story is never going to be the same story repeated back to back. Each playthrough is always going to be different, whereas in Zork, all the playthroughs are the same exact playthroughs and the same exact choices. And we have context awareness, something that, again, Zork and other interactive novels have been limited with so far. Another company that is also doing something similar to ours is AI Dungeon, but our solution is different from theirs because our goal is to have more enhanced immersion, and we do this through visuals that we're going to be adding in future sprints, where there's going to be um, players can see the NPCs and the enemies that they're going to be interacting throughout the game. And also our solution has a multiplayer option where users can invite their friends and play the game with other people and shape the story together. And ours also is going to be more accessible in terms of it being more engaging and easy to read by people with limited English understanding, so we can meet a wide variety of audiences. So to kind of briefly go over the project description as a whole, so Quest aims to be an interactive web-based platform to to help users have a interactive experience in the novel. Also allows users to dive into a thrilling world of imagination, and it helps the readers to shape the narrative by making choices that directly impact the story's progression. And these choices can influence the characters' relationships, change story outcomes, provoke ethical dilemmas, and unlock potentially secret plots. And again, unlike our competitors, Quest is more immersive and it's more organic in its narration. Quest uses visual elements and uses a dice roll mechanism to guide the story. Quest also has a multiplayer option, whereas our competitors can only be played by one player at a time. So with that, we can go to team agreements with Clive.
So, yeah, speaking about the team working agreement, this is the current team working agreement that we have laid down in terms of the communication expectations, where we have decided what our communication channels would look like, where each member is expected to voice their concerns when it comes to any point or any discussion process. When it comes to meeting schedule and pattern, we have decided that there should be meetings scheduled twice a week, or certain plans where sprint plan will be devised in the first team meeting itself, and will be scheduled immediately after the sprint has been completed. Uh, yeah, moving to the next slide. Uh, when it comes to the team dynamics and principles, we talk mainly in terms of how every team member should be treated with kindness and respect, and major points such as Jira should be updated regularly to make sure everything can be tracked, and work should be shared through GitHub. And when it comes to, we also have the, I'm sorry, can you go ahead? Yeah, we also have a checklist marking all what is considered as a task to be completed, where certain points such as code should meet all acceptance criteria, code should not have any syntactical errors, and so on.
All right. So for our project, we've been building it by keeping our user base in mind. We've narrowed down this user base to three user personas. The first one is a reader persona. This is anyone who just is looking for a timely escape in their day-to-day life to interact with their favorite novel and make the dynamic choices for themselves and look at how the story shapes out. This is one of our user bases. The next is the novelist persona. This persona was made keeping in mind all the creative writers and all the people that work in creative fields to help them with creative blocks, writer's blocks, and just give them a way to engage with their own work without having to think about plagiarism, theft, or just having a colleague steal their work. The third is the gamer persona. This user base is for anybody who is a gamer and is just bored or struggles with finding new games that are different and can be replayed over and over again. So while building Quest, what we keep in mind is to not have predictability. And so we have the dice roll mechanism which keeps the game unpredictable. It keeps it different. The narrative changes every time, and no one game outcome will be the same as the other. And this is the persona that we're trying to serve when we build those features.
So the MVP that we are aiming to build for this for the Quest is going to be ultimately an AI-driven interactive novel that has visual elements, which is the thing that makes us stand out compared to our existing solutions. So we're going to have dynamic narratives, meaning that the user can shape the story based on any input that they put. Their choice system is the user can type any interaction that they want, and the visual elements, they're going to be where the enemies and the NPC portraits that I'm showing on the right are going to be presented every time these are in the scene. And we're going to have a simple UI where it's going to be accessible to everyone and everybody can potentially customize them, personalize it. We are going to add a pause and resume um, feature into this application so that the users can continue the story wherever they want. And we're going to be implementing this most likely by the next sprint.
Hi, I'm Dhruv, and I'll explain the technologies that we are using in this project. So for front end, we are using JavaScript and React. For backend, we have Node.js, Express.js, and OpenAI's API. We have MongoDB as our database, and the tools that we'll be using are Jira, GitHub, Visual Studio Code, Slack, etc. So describing the front end, we went with JavaScript and React because it is the current staple in the technology and current staple in the market to use that, because it is first off flexible, lightweight, and we actually have a big, huge support for this technology stack, because the best example would be that a text-to-speech package that is already built in React that can actually access the browsers, and that is one of the main examples why we selected JavaScript and React for a front end. Next slide, please. So for backend, we selected Express.js and Node.js because they are seamless integration with any and all APIs, and also with the front end that we have. So it's basically like Lego blocks fitting in with each other, and it's also a staple in the market right now. And in future works to add other Python APIs and add other components to our project would be much more easier if we go this route. Next slide. So for database, MongoDB is a NoSQL type database, which is the best case scenario for our project, because we have to store object-like data for each and every session, for each and every interaction that is being occurred with the user and the project. So MongoDB was the best option that we could go for. Next slide, please. And the tools that we are using are Visual Studio Code, GitHub, Jira, and the combination of this entire set gives us a seamless integration for the development workflow. Next. So all of the stories and all of the tasks that we undertake in our entire project are divided into these four main theoretical components. First being a player status manager, that all of the stories which are related to managing the player status and the data regarding player is classified as the player status manager. Game status manager is all of the stories and all of the tasks and the components which are pertaining to managing the game falls here. For example, keeping track of the dice roll, keeping the track of end game, etc. AI LLM model manager. Now, what this model manager is responsible for is to ensure that the AI model is being interacted in the right way, like preventing prompt injections and stuff like that in our project. Now, prompt generator is the component which is responsible for the communication present between the AI model and the user. So the project schedule. So currently we are in sprint 2, at the precipice of completion of sprint 2, where we have completed the base of our entire project, and currently we are looking forward to add functionalities to create a better experience all around in the project.
Okay, so we'll first start with our architecture diagram. Here we'll have the user who will be communicating with the front end, where we're using React in there. There is where all the information will be taken from the user and begin communicating with the backend. Backend from the other side, which is in Express and Node, is going to use the database and the narrator to create the interactive novel and present it to the front end for the user. And this will be it for the architecture. We have kept this very simple and created in a way that can be easily scaled.
Hi, so I'm going to be explaining the ER diagram in which, so the ER diagram is the database schema for the interactive story-driven game. It outlines the different entities in the database and the relationships between them. Let's break down each entity and its attributes as well as the relationships. So first comes the themes, where we have the theme ID, which is the primary key. Then there's the description, title, and the timestamp. The next one is the stories, where there's story ID, which is again the primary key, title, description, prompt, timestamp, ending state, theme ID, which is the foreign key, and MPC ID, which is also the foreign key. The next one is the game session, where the game session ID is the primary key, the story state is complete status, timestamp, story ID, which is the foreign key, and the character ID, which is also the foreign key. The next one is logs, where logs ID is the primary key. Then there's context, user input, timestamp, session ID, which is the foreign key. Then there's NPCs. Sorry. The NPC ID is the primary key. Then there's title, role, description, backstory, stats, alignments, and timestamp. Then there's characters. In that, there's character ID, which is the primary key, name, race, class, background, stats, and timestamp. Then we come to relationships, where there's one-to-many relationship, where it's themes to stories, where one theme can have multiple stories associated with it. Then the stories to game session, where one story can have multiple game sessions played based on it which is indicated by the line connecting story ID and stories to story ID and game session. Then there's game session to logs, where one game session can have multiple log entries, which is indicated by the line connecting game session ID and game session to session ID and logs. Then there's NPCs to stories, where one NPC can be associated with multiple stories, which is indicated by the line connecting NPC ID and NPCs to NPC ID and stories. Then lastly, there's characters to game session, where one character can be played in multiple game sessions, which is indicated by the line connecting character ID and characters to character ID in game session. So the CR diagram is a way to provide a structured way to organize and manage the data which is required for Quest.
The context diagram. So the entire flow of our project originates from the user, where the user will first select the story, first select the theme. I'm so sorry. First, this user will select a theme of the entire novel. Then the story will select one of the preset stories or would put in their own custom story for the context diagram. And then the user will be prompted to create a character. And then we would be present at the game session window. So while reaching at the game session window, the user will have a turn-based interaction with the game session where the game session will be started by our main context quest, which would be referencing the OpenAI API model and then storing all of the required data onto the MongoDB Atlas database as shown.
Yeah, so I'll explain the sequence diagram. So to start with, let's go with the start game sequence diagram. It starts with the player. The player wants to start a new game. He clicks start new game. In order to select his game, stories are categorized by themes. So the front end first asks the back end through the /API themes endpoint to give me all the themes. These themes are got taken pulled from MongoDB into the backend and back into front end. All the themes are shown. Now, when the user selects a theme, the front end wants to display all the stories within that theme. So it asks the backend to like get all stories for that theme. So it passes the theme ID with the API stories, gets all the stories for that theme, displays it. User selects story, and after selecting story, you have to create your character. So a form is shown to enter your character details. Once character details are filled, a start game option is given, and the game is started. The game is started by the front end sending a post call to the back end on the start game endpoint. The session is created with all the details such as the story ID selected. Yeah, the story ID selected and the session ID is created. Once we have the session ID, we can now link the character created to the session ID while creating the character as shown in the AI diagram. And then finally, we fetch the story by story ID, and this only because we need to display the first initial prompt to the user, like the starting state of the story to the user. And that is taken from the database to the backend and then finally propagated to the front end along with the session ID. Here, the front end saves the session ID on the browser for replayability. Next slide. So that was start game. This is how player choices happen. This is without the dice roll kept in mind. The dice roll one will be explained in the next slide. But every time the user enters a choice, suppose he wants to take the left turn or the right turn or proceed through the forest, he calls the API play turn with his session ID so that the backend knows which session ID is referring to and that player's choice. The backend stores this choice in the database as a log, and then it retrieves all the session logs. This is done because we're using OpenAI API and that is stateless. So to maintain continuity with the narrator, we have to pass in all the session logs so that the narrator knows exactly what's happening. So after we get all session logs, we send all of this to the narrator to generate the next story progression. The narrator does its stuff, passes back its next story progression. This is saved as a new log and passed back to the front end. Yeah, so this is the same thing but with dice roll. So I'll explain the difference. So the player enters a choice, the choice propagates to the backend, and the backend sends it to the narrator as explained by fetching all the session logs. But only thing here is if the narrator decides that suppose the choice entered by the player has a certain level of unpredictability, it'll send back uh, the backend saying that oh, a dice roll is required. And it also tell what threshold it requires to succeed this dice roll and fail it. So once the generated narrator progression gets passed back to the backend, if a dice roll is required, it stores also that dice roll threshold in the database and it sends it back to the front end, telling the front end, you need a dice roll to continue. So now that the front end knows that a dice roll is required, it locks its input and gives a dice roll option. The user clicks the dice roll option. It goes to the backend. The backend rolls the dice, like it does the logic for rolling dice by selecting a random number or whatever logic. And then based on that output, it decides whether it succeeded or failed. It'll save that as a session log. And then the same thing as play turn happens. It'll get all the session logs and then pass it back to the narrator with the threshold whether you passed or failed. The narrator sends the newly generated progression based on your pass or fail, stores this as a log, and sends it back to the front end where the user can see it. Next one. Yeah, so this one is manual game end. Suppose the user wants to end the game halfway through. It is quite simple. He clicks the end game option. We send the front end sends to the back end an end game a post call to the end game API. This in the database we mark it as ended. It sends a game ended message back to the front end. The front end takes this message, gracefully deletes the session ID, and sends a message to the player saying that your game has ended. Yeah. And I think last is the game end by the narrator. Suppose you win, you lose. Yeah. So this will follow the same logic as play turn. So the user enters a choice. The front end sends that choice to the backend. The backend stores it as session log, retrieves all the session logs, and send it back to the narrator. Every time it goes to the narrator decides whether the game has reached its conclusive end by checking similarity scores with the database's endgame state. So suppose if I find the chest in the cave, I won. If the similarity score of the entire story is close enough to that, it'll send back to the backend saying that endgame true. In case endgame is ever true, it'll mark this session as ended. It'll save that log and it'll send the appropriate message to the front end, whether you have succeeded or failed. Once it sends a message to the front end, the game does end. So we need to delete the session ID and display the message accordingly to the front end. And that message will be sent from the back end to the front end, and the front end will display it to the user. And yeah, that is all.
All right, so we'll do a quick overview of what we did in Sprint 1. So initially, what we set up for our project was we had a set of user stories that we did. We set up logical story developments. We set up the preset themes for the users to pick from. We set up preset stories for the users that they can pick from. We also added a feature that so the story could be rated, a scrollable feature if the story got too long. Initially, we did not have a endpoint for our game to end, which is what we did this sprint. We started with the character description. We started developing that part, but we completed it in this sprint. Uh, so, and in addition to that, we also had so we had dynamic choices, we had the stories, the themes, and this was the base MVP that we did for Sprint 1, and we built on it in Sprint 2. We had a bunch of test cases for our Sprint 1 user stories. Most of them passed. The story that was not completed failed. We only had one test case that failed last sprint, which we worked on and fixed this sprint. So for sprint 1, our team velocity was 37. We committed to 44 story points. We delivered 37. We carried over 7 points, which overall brings our team velocity ratio to 84% work that we did in sprint 1. This is the track we were on. And now we will proceed to the product backlog and what sprint 2 looked like.
So yeah, hi everyone. Talking about the product backlog, we have all these stories assigned together as part of the entire product MVP that needs to be created finally. And as you can see on the screen, you can see a certain portion of this marked, which was implemented in our first sprint. We also have, can you just go back to the last slide? Yeah, the last two indicate that they were not completed in its entirety in the first sprint itself, and hence they were carried on to the next sprint. Can you move that? Yeah, and these were the stories that we pretty much committed to in as part of this sprint ideology, where we wanted to look clearly towards how the game would be ended, how dice roll would be implemented, and so on, and which I would speak more in detail as we go to the sprint backlog. And these are some more stories which we look forward to implementing into the next sprint, and hence they were bifurcated in this manner, where we think that these are more niche, particular issues that might not contribute highly to the main MVP itself. So talking about the Sprint 2 backlog in particular, where we focused on firstly what was carried on from the previous sprint, such as mainly describing the characters itself and having creative and descriptive descriptions of the environment. Um, these were two stories that we wanted to mainly focus on since they were pending from the last sprint and are quite important for the quite important for the MVP itself. Some further implementations we wanted to implement included points such as having NPCs introduced into this uh, sprint itself, where NPCs would not only be uh, like not only exist as an entity in the storyline, but also be introduced at the right point in the right place in the stories so that it feels natural. We also wanted to implement a clear indication of how the game is supposed to end. We also wanted to focus on how a dice roll would decide certain instances in the game and make it more unpredictable per se, and help us determine the end game as well eventually. We also wanted to receive clear feedback as to when the dice roll has passed or failed. And we also wanted to improve the immersion experience by having more voice features in this in our chat window functionality itself.
Hi. So this story was a part of this is the story that we carry forward from the last sprint, where me and Ayla were working on it, where the issue and the reason that we carried it from the last sprint was first, we were still setting up the flow of the entire project on which screens were supposed to be, where they had to be. And secondly, I was still catching up on the skills required to create the front end for the same. So we completed this story in this sprint by passing all of the test cases, and test cases were carried out by Farah.
Okay, so the second user story is as a player, I want the AI to enhance storytelling by generating detailed environmental descriptions and character emotions. So this all tested, as you can see, were passed on April 2nd, confirming that the AI is effectively enhancing the narrative. This is a very straightforward test case. Firstly, AI generates environmental descriptions. Secondly, generates character emotions. The test flow for both of them is the same, where you basically initiate the story and then the user or the player types the input or begin the storytelling. These test cases were successfully passed, as I mentioned. As for the first one, the AI provided a detailed explanation and generated a rich description of the environment where the story will take place. And for the second one, the AI included emotional context, such as, for example, expressing character feelings appropriately with the storytelling.
So coming to this story in particular, where we wanted to reach in a conclusion of the game, we had three particular test cases, out of which one has failed. So speaking about the test cases in particular, the first test case specifically talks about how we need to reach a conclusion of the game, but also have a clear text description showing that the game has ended, which is something happens sometimes, but doesn't happen all the time. And so we had to go ahead and fail this case, even though the other two uh, acceptance criteria were met, where the front end does receive a response saying that the game has ended and the session is deleted, but we don't really get a clear description on the text itself showing that the game has ended, and hence this particular test case has failed. Speaking about the second test case, um, we have a clear banner indicating at the top where it says whether you won or lost based on dice roll counts, and we also have an end of the game happening at 10 iterations. We particularly decided this for this iteration of the game because we wanted to have clear indication of the game ending, because it's an interactive novel, so it could go on for a while, and hence we wanted to make sure that we are able to see the end in this print itself. Another test case, particular, and this describing again the previous test case was passed. So talking about the third test case, we wanted to mainly have the chat input disabled as soon as the game has ended, and again speaking about how clearly it displays that the game has ended. Uh, we have already proven that in the previous test case in particular, but it that is met, but also the chat window is clearly disabled, which helps us pass this test case as well. And hence, just because of one test case, we might have to work on it a little bit more in the next sprint.
So this user story is the part where the user can interact with non-playable characters and they fit the story and the context more dynamically. So the test case for this was also very straightforward, where the NPC needs to appear in the context and it needs to appear in while maintaining logical continuity. And also another test case for this was that a user needs to be able to interact with the NPC, and the NPC needs to respond based on their assigned behavior and personality in the database. So the test flow for the first case is that you start the game, you start exploring the campaign until the narrator decides to in kind of like make the NPC appear in your story. And so the expected result was that throughout the narration, the NPCs make an appearance in their assigned story. So if two NPCs are assigned to a specific story, those two NPCs are going to come along the story eventually. And also, the actual result for this was that, when you're doing the campaign, you do get to see the NPCs appear, but there's a little issue that we will have to fix, which is that the NPCs can kind of appear at like the NPCs can be triggered to appear in frequent times at times. So it does pass the sense where it does appear in the story and it does maintain logical continuity, but it's just a little bit more in control of the users playing the game. And the user interactions with the NPC, the test flow goes the similar way. You start the game, explore the campaign until you find the NPCs. And when you do find the NPCs, you request an action very directly to them. So you can say, I spoke to them, I shook their hand, or I pushed them. And the NPC will give you a response according to what the user inputted into the interaction part. So then the expected result was good for this one, where the user can interact with the NPCs and NPCs responds accordingly to that based on their preset characters. So, and maintaining logical continuity. And this was achieved when we did the test. The actual result was that the user could interact with the NPCs, and the NPCs did respond with their preset character description, and it maintained logical story continuity. And these were tested by Dylan.
Yeah, so this user story deals with giving the user an option to roll the dice when their choices may be unpredictable or require some level of luck, let's say. Um, so the test cases here were detect whether dice roll is required. So when you put an unpredictable request to the narrator has to determine whether that action is unpredictable and prompt the user to roll a dice. So we did that by putting an unpredictable requirement and seeing if the narrator replies with, do you, replies with, yes, I require a dice roll. That passed, tested by Sharon. Then another thing is the second test case is when dice roll is required, the user should not be able to input text. So obviously the user input should be disabled so that the user cannot find a way to give text to the narrator. So that was tested and the input was disabled. Yeah, so once dice roll has been requested from the front end, we want to trigger the API roll dice instead of play turn. So that was again tested. When you click the dice roll button, it goes to the API roll dice instead of play turn, and the narration continues as expected. Save dice roll result in session log. Once a dice roll has been rolled, the success threshold and the requirement of a dice roll has to be saved in session log so that the narration continues appropriately. That was tested and checked on MongoDB, and yes, logs were created. And then obviously after a dice roll has been completed and if there's no further dice roll required, user input has to be unlocked. And so we tested that after rolling a dice and the narration continued, the user input was enabled and access to the play turn API was given back to the user. Yeah. I'll also like to talk about this test case. As an admin user, I would like to add NPCs to the stories. So for this, we made two test cases. One is to be able to create an NPC and see it within the story in the database. So for that, we tested the create NPC endpoint by passing the required fields and checking in MongoDB if they were updated and linked to the correct story. So that was the expected result was received, was seen, and it passed. The second one was to edit the created NPC and make sure that only the fields that are required to change. We tested this again by changing an NPC in one of the stories and only changing its name, and that was reflected accordingly in the database. All the fields remain the same except the name one, which changed, which was the required result, and that passed as well. You can move on. Yeah, so for this user story, when a dice roll has been completed, as a user, I would like to see whether it passed, it failed, what value did I roll in the dice. So the test cases are as follows. The first one is to see success feedback. If I beat the threshold, I want a success message and the story to move on in that way. So that was tested. That was tested in the UI. It showed that you rolled a 6. The threshold was 4. You have succeeded. That was reflected correctly in the UI. Same thing for failure, which is the next test case. If you roll below the threshold, it should show that you failed. So again, you rolled a 2, the threshold required was 4, you fail, and then the story moved on that way. Then roll result showed immediately. That correlates with the top two test cases, whether you're shown the actual output that you got. So if you rolled a 6, it clearly states that you rolled a 6. And it also reflects in the dice roll UI. Then the last case is the narrator response reflects success or failure. So if your dice roll was a success and suppose the task was to climb a tree, if you got a success, it would say the story would continue that yes, you did climb the tree and achieved what requirement, and then the story progresses from you climbing the tree. If you failed, it would say something like, oh, you attempted to climb the tree, but you fell, and so on. The story continues. All test cases passed, and they were tested by Ayla. Yeah. So, Sprint 2 story is completed. So this is just an overview of which stories we had completed for Sprint 2, and which didn't complete. I'll just quickly go over through all of them. The first one is to be able to create your character for the story you're going to play. That was completed with all the subtasks. Then the next story is environmental description. So,
Oh, sorry.
that's okay. Environment description. So for that, we needed to prompt the narrator to be more descriptive in the story, to expand on the environment. That was done by Ayla, and that was completed. This one story, yeah, reached the game's conclusion. Like the narrator should be able to tell whether the game has ended and end the game. This was done, but it failed a lot of test cases, so we have stated it as not completed. Then the next user story is I want to interact with NPC characters as an active part of the story. This was done by Faram and was completed. The dice the next user story is that dice roll should be required for unpredictable outcomes. This was done by me and it was completed. Next. 13, as an admin user, I would like to add interesting NPCs into the storyline preset. So this was the admin section. It was done by Sharon and it was completed. Then the user story 14 was text to speech. I want to listen to the story so I can have a more immersive experience. This was also somewhat completed, but it failed like most of the test cases, so we kept it as incomplete and move on to the next sprint. And then clear feedback to show that your dice roll has passed or failed. This was done by me and it has completed.
So this area just shows the user stories that we did complete during the sprint 2, just a brief overview of it in table form. So you can see that user story 10 was not completed and user story 14 was also not completed, which will be carried over. And looking at our team velocity, we had for sprint two 30 story points completed it, and our average team velocity comes out to as 34 based on sprint one and sprint two. So for this sprint, the total points that are going to be carried over to the next sprint is going to be 10 points, which we will be looking at them more in detail. So our committed ratio based on this is that we took on 40 points for this sprint and we completed 30 of them, which brings us to a committed ratio of 83%, which is slightly less than the previous sprint, but not by a lot, which is still keeping our average between 84%. So good job, everybody. This is our Sprint 2's burnt down chart. And I'm going to be discussing it in a kind of like the timeline of how things happen during our sprint. So it starts off by everybody putting up their user stories within Jira. And obviously that first instance of a horizontal line is based on the fact that we were on spring break. So after the spring break ended, we all started to work on the tasks that were at hand. The reason why there's a big dip here is because we were able to finish two user stories that were high in story points very early on, which kind of gave us a advantage in making our work kind of progress much faster. So here on, we have the work assigned, but I'm assuming because of the fact that there was a big dip here, everybody is now a little bit more comfortable and knows that they can wait a little bit until beginning the other progress tasks, the tasks on hand. So here on, we started to see gradual works on the lower priority and the lower story point user stories being achieved. So as the work is kept going on very short iterations, works are being done. Each sprint is being done, and it goes down way below the actual or expected work burnt down chart. But towards the end, as you can see, there is gonna be an increase on the user stories and the points that we assign. This was because we did complete a story point towards the end. We did complete a user story. However, it being not complete to it having like a lot of errors, we had to go back again and put it as into validation because it would need more work for it to be considered actually complete. So that's why at the end we have that little increased dip. But with that, we think we did great. But next sprint, we're probably going to be taking on more user stories so that our work is a little bit more aligned with the expected burnt down chart results.
Yeah, so I'll be speaking about the retrospective. Um, so we'll start with what went well. I'll hand out everyone's gold stars. So, to begin with, knowledge sharing, I think we did this really well with peer-to-peer and with peer-to-peer. Basically, we all got together. I mean, we paired up with another programmer, and then as we developed things got more tight and stronger. And yeah, so the code was way better than it was when only one person was working. Then we broke task into subtasks. So a problem that we had with the last sprint was that we took up the tasks were too big and then we only covered 75% of the task and we didn't know what we were missing for the last 25% till it was too late. So by breaking down tasks, we know exactly what to do and it's a step-by-step manner. Then stand-ups kept everyone updated. Another improvement this sprint was that um, we did weekly stand-ups so that we knew which stories were going to get completed and who needed help where, and that really helped everything. The focused on complex tasks first, which was reflected in the burn down chart, really helped us. It was like eating the broccoli first before enjoying the dessert. So in the end, we were relaxed and we could do it at our own pace. Then we also implemented the vote of confidence, which really, really helped everyone understand the user stories and how complex things were. So if someone thought the user story was uh, the story points assigned to user story were not enough or too much, they voted a less confidence, and then we had discussion of why things should be the way it is or if we should change it, and that really helped even understanding the story. Yeah, so that is for what went well. But we need to move on to what could be improved because we got to be humbled. So often the case was even though we had daily stand-ups, which was an outlet to offer help, like a lot of times, like help offered was not taken, and it was only brought up at the end when stories were not completed. So for that, we need to have more open communication and ask help when needed, as reflected in one of our commitment points. Then documents were not updated on time, so test cases and completed stories were not updated till the last few days, so which made it harder to finish off the presentation slides and discuss and move on with the retrospective and stuff like that. Then uneven work distribution, we often saw that some people had to carry the team while others, okay, not carry the team, but like some people had to do more work while other people had less work, and that left some people idle while some people were getting burnt out. Then we'll also need better work ethics, like showing up for meetings, informing the team when you cannot make it well in advance. Then we had too many of I'll finish it by tonight deadlines, where people said, yes, I'll finish it by tonight, and things did not get completed. I felt like this was too much of a rushed deadline, and the commitment had to be better planned out. Then documentation was all over the place. That goes for these slides. When we needed to make the metrics and to place the test cases, a lot of people could not find where to take screenshots, and for that, I think we need better naming conventions and place our documentation properly. Code practices were not maintained since we were all working on separate user stories. We felt that code, like a lot of code, is not modular. There was a lot of repeated code. Variable names were not named properly, and it was not caught till the end. Then, for all these things that could be improved, we have decided on a few commitments. One is to be more available. So, like, respond on the group, tell when you cannot attend a meeting, and so on. Then we will be using Jira reports more for stand-ups. This is to handle the uneven work distribution so that we can see, okay, who is working on too much and who is done with task, and then, reassign things here and there. Ask for help when needed. We're going to try to use the daily stand-ups better and like commit to asking for help when needed, and not at the end when it's too late to ask. Then set realistic commitments. This goes in line with I'll finish it by tonight deadlines. So don't commit to things without thinking it through. Maybe add a buffer for your like a day buffer for your commitments and so on, and think about the commitment before saying it. Then deadline for code freeze should be respected. So when a code freeze is set, no more code should be pushed later. That's pretty much self-explanatory. Better understanding of the overall project. This will help with the code practices not maintained. So when someone has implemented a function for something, if we had a better overall understanding of the project, we would know, or we'd know who to ask if something like this was implemented so that we can reuse it. And that goes with the next point also, which is follow modular code practices. If we start making our code more modular, there'll be a lot of reusability and less repeated work, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. So yeah, that's all for now.
So let me walk you through the stories that we have planned for Sprint 3. As explained before, our Sprint 3 is entirely focused on improving the aspects of the game where the interaction is improved, where we have a better user interface, where all of the bells and whistles are being added as the base code is pretty much done for now. So going through the stories, the player should be able to choose the number of players to explore adventures together. This is sort of a multiplayer feature that we are trying to implement over here. The next one is that the player wants the app to play their favorite novel as a story when they enter the novel's name. So now let's say that I am a fan of Game of Thrones books and I want the AI novel to have a Game of Thrones theme, and say I would try to act as Jon Snow in the entire AI novel that I will be playing over here. So we also want this feature to be implemented over here. This is a bit separate from the preset user stories that we already have, as this is aimed specifically onto a novel or an existing story that the user wants. So the next being, I want to interact with the game with voice controls. Now, this is an accessibility feature that we are trying to add where a user can also use this AI novel as an audiobook while doing a task or, let's say, cleaning the house, etc., etc. So this just interacts and gives a better experience for using this using our product. As a user, I want the app to dynamically adapt to me and my friends' choices while keeping the story interesting. This revolves around having the AI, like forcing the AI to make more decisions based on better dynamicity and better unpredictability of keeping the story interesting and in that particular context. The next story being, I want to determine which player goes next so I can choose who makes the next interaction. It's like a turn-based RPG element that we would be trying to implement here as a feature. The next story being, I want to customize the UI like font size and color adjustments. Of course, that is something that each and every website like application should have. And it also goes a long way to improve the what do you call it? Improve the interaction quality with our product. The next story is I want the game to have graphics and animations which enhances the storyline. Visual elements to our entire product would, tie the final ribbon on the entire package that we have, because the text is generated very good, like I experienced it for myself, and now we would have to add more graphics to it. So it would just give a better and more refined experience for interacting with our product. And the last story being, I want to able to generate the image of the context so that I can see what my protagonist is looking at. Basically, painting a picture of what we want the player to see or what the situation is going on in the novel. Next slide, please. So US 10 and US 14 are the two stories that we will be carrying over from Sprint 2. US 10 being the game's conclusion, we would be refining the algorithm to ensure that the game's conclusion is reached in a more natural way rather than it feeling artificial. And currently, we are also experimenting with a lot of packages to have text to speech and speech to text functionalities in our product. And that is the reason why US 14 is also being carried over right now.
So Dylan,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, I'll just run you through the screenshots for the application, but most of it will be shown again in the app demo. This is our Choose Your Adventure. This is the theme selector page. So these are the different themes we have. This is the story. You can go ahead. Story page, where when you select a story, you can see the NPCs within that story. Next page. This is the character creation page where you fill up your protagonist character, its name, race, class, background, and stats. Next. And finally, this is the chat that you have with the narrator where you play the story, make your decisions, roll the dice, and so on. Um,
All right, so we'll look at our API documentation for the project. So these are the story and preset theme and story APIs. They got another admin endpoint for the admin user. where the admin could create a story and edit a created story or a theme that was previously created. So we have our get, post, and we also have batch APIs for these.
So the create character API would basically has all of the functions which is required to put a character in, that is post a character and get a character from the database. We added this functionality for fetching character by name, just as a contingency in case if we go ahead to uh, implement further features where we would be collecting all of the characters and uh, introducing characters as NPCs over here randomly.
Yeah, this part has to do with the the game session controlling. So first one is to start game, where you send your selected story ID, and it's a post endpoint which sends back the initial story prompt and the session ID for the front end to save. Second one is play turn. Every time the user inputs text into the input box and sends it, it has to be sent per session ID and what the player just typed in to the backend. Then it's a post endpoint. Then get game state is just to get where the game is and what the past choices are. So it fetches all the logs from the database and so on. Manual end game is to end the game in case the user wants to quit the game in between. All this does is sends a post endpoint to the backend, which deletes the session, which marks the game as ended, and the front end. Accordingly, the reply will delete the session ID on the front end. Get player choices is this is to display the chat logs on the front end. So uh, API slash game choice slash session ID. So for that session, you can fetch all the the logs for that session, which is the narrator's log and the user log. Next one.
So this is the logs API where it helps to create the log transcript and also fetch the log transcript by session for the OpenAI to kind of read and continue the story with logical continuity. So the first one is the request type is a post. It does it from the endpoint API logs. And it's again saves logs by session. And this is the example of an input body. And the fetch log transcript also is a get request type, which is from the API logs session ID. Its query parameter is also session ID, and it retrieves all the logs based on a specified session ID. And here's an example output of what that looks like.
Yeah, this is the roll dice API. So this API is only called when the narrator requires a roll dice, and this replaces the play turn API. So in case there's a roll dice required, a roll dice option will show up on the UI, and when you click it, it'll send a post endpoint. It'll send a post request to the endpoint slash roll dice, sending the session ID, and then it'll get the required dice roll information back. Suppose like what value did you roll, what is the dice user message, and so on, and the required thresholds to accordingly display on the front end.
Okay,
So yeah,
this
Ayla.
wiki page link. We have done some little changes to the structure, so I want to go through to show everybody the organization. Can you scroll up? Okay, is the project description, then we have the team members. Yeah, then we have the project design, following up with the languages and all the technologies that we are using for this project. We have listed all the diagrams. You can just click on the diagram and you'll have the access to the view of each of it. Yeah. Then we have the MVP demo. This is the Spring deliverables. Yeah, you can scroll down. Here we have organized everything by the sprint number. For example, if a recording or a document belongs to the sprint 0, everything will be uploaded under the sprint 0. This is the sprint 0. Sprint 1 has everything on it. Yeah, so the stories, test cases, prototype, burn chart, completed task, and retrospective. For the sprint 2, we have to uh finish this meeting and then we'll upload everything here, every document, and all the recordings will be uploaded under the sprint 2. The same thing will happen with the sprint 3, and then the team working agreement is here, and then finish up with the product personas. We'll be uploading this wiki page to everybody to have access to it.
So I'm gonna quickly stop sharing. Dylan, are you ready to present the demo?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Stop sharing.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, I'm just gonna move things around just a sec. Yeah. So this is the landing page that you will be greeted to when you open Quest Journey into the Unknown. Beautiful screen. These are the different themes where you can see which you can select. So for now, I will select Dark Forest. This is the only story that's available in Dark Forest, Whispers in the Dark. We'll go ahead and play this. These are the beautiful NPCs mentioned, Elder Sorin and Lord Malaka. So these are the NPCs that you'll find within the story if you do manage to find them. So to enter character details, I will use a pre-filled character. So this is one that I've inputted myself right now. So just using autofill. So fairy cake, half human, half dolphin, demi-human animal background. Let's go with uh, former member of the Imperial Army of the Northern Dolphin Tribe. Strength 8, Dexterity 1, can't use his hands, he's half dolphin. Constitution 8, Intelligence 10, he's a dolphin, very smart animal. Wisdom 8, he's still a dolphin. Charisma 6, again, he's a dolphin. So let's go ahead playing the game. The adventure begins. A voice whispers your name from the darkness ahead, but you can't tell if it's a spirit, a trap, or a guide. The path forks, one leading deeper into the forest and the other back toward the edge of the woods. What do you do? I so for this, I know that I'm in a forest, so I'm gonna attempt to climb the forest, a tree to get like a better view. So I attempt to climb a tree to get a better understanding of my surroundings. Ignore any spelling mistakes. I don't know them. You guys can see the whole thing, right? I don't know if.
Yeah, Dylan, we can see it.
Okay. Given your low dexterity, climbing can be a challenging task. Fairy cake, he's a dolphin. As a former member of the Imperial Army of the Northern Dolphin Tribe, you're more used to swimming than climbing. Makes sense. Do you manage to climb the tree successfully? So as you can see, a dice roll option has shown up, and you cannot really type anything. So it's asking for you to roll the dice. So I roll the dice. The dice rolls so beautifully. Wow, 3D. And it rolls. It says that player rolled a 1, threshold is 4, failure, or I guess you can't climb with dolphin fins. As a former member of the Imperial Army of the Northern Dolphin Tribe, your strength is considerable, but your dexterity, alas, is not. You lose your grip and fall back down the tree, landing on the ground, unharmed, but no better off. You choose to speak to this voice, or will you take one of the paths before you? So yeah, so this is basically how the story goes. You go ahead, you try to find the NPCs, maybe they will help you in the game, and so on, but eventually try to reach the logical conclusion. So yeah, this is all that is there to demo for this sprint. Thank you.
Oh, so I think with that, this is the end of our Sprint 2 presentation. Good job, everybody. We're going to be working on Sprint 3 very soon.
Actually, yeah, sorry, I forgot. My bad. I'll just show a little code. My bad, Farham. I know you're angry. I'll have to show a little code. Um,
Show a little code.
so I'll run you through the narrator controller options. So one of the functions is start game, where you'll require the story ID and the character to start the game. It goes ahead by creating a character, then creating a session on the database, and then linking that created character to the session created, because before this you didn't have session ID. These two steps could be reversed, but it's fine. And then creating the initial log saying that using the initial story state from the save story in the in MongoDB as the first message and without any user input because it's awaiting for user input, and then responds to the front end with the required details. Session ID, which the front end eventually saves. And then the other function that I would like to show was play turn, where you pass in your session ID and your player choice. Without this, it will fail. Um, first the first the backend checks if the session indeed doesn't exist. So it checks, finds the session ID. If it does not exist, it will say it does not exist. And also, if it was marked as completed or if you reach the end, you should not be able to make any more choices. So, and waste resources. So basically, if it is completed, it'll stop you, and then it'll add your player choice to the last log. So basically, the last log will always be expecting user input because the narrator has responded and you're waiting for user input. So it'll add to that log. And then it'll process narration. Process narration just takes all the session logs with your new added log, sends it to the Open API, and accordingly fetches the next response. This response is then sent. Yeah, I will not be showing process narration because it has a lot of rules, but here's a brief overview. These are the routes for the narrator controller: start game, play turn, game state, end game, game choices, and roll dice. Yeah, that is all for real this time.
So, with that, we can officially conclude today's presentation for Sprint 2. Good job, everybody. Everybody did well. Hope we do well again for Sprint 3. See you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
bye-bye.
Bye.